The Stairs That Changed Everything, posted in r/legal advice by you/back from the brink. I'm writing this from my lawyer's office, and my hands are still shaking. 6 months ago, I was in a coma. Today, I watched my parents collapse in a courtroom when they realized their dead daughter was very much alive and seeking justice. I need to start from the beginning because what happened to me sounds like something from a soap opera, but every word is true. My name is Emma, and I'm 26 years old, or at least I was 26 when this all started. I lost 4 months of my life, so I'm not entirely sure how to count anymore. I grew up in what looked like the perfect American family. Dad, Richard, is a successful insurance executive. Mom, Patricia, runs a high-end boutique in downtown Portland. My older sister, Madison, has always been the golden child. Valedictorian, full scholarship to Stanford, now working at a prestigious law firm in Seattle. And then there was me. Average grades, community college, working as a veterinary assistant because I loved animals more than I ever loved people. In my family's eyes, I was the disappointment. The one who never lived up to her potential, the one they had to make excuses for at dinner parties. But I didn't mind, really. I had my own apartment, my own life, my own dreams. I was saving money to go back to school for veterinary medicine. I was happy, even if my family saw my happiness as settling for mediocrity. The day everything changed was Madison's birthday. She was turning 30, and Mom had planned this elaborate dinner party at the family house. The same house where Madison and I grew up. The same house where I'd spent my childhood trying to measure up to a sister who seemed perfect at everything. I almost didn't go. Madison and I had been drifting apart for years, and I could feel the judgment in every family gathering. But Mom had called and practically begged me to come, said it would mean everything to Madison, said we needed to come together as a family. God, I was so stupid. The party was exactly what I expected. Madison's law school friends, her colleagues, her perfect boyfriend Derek, who worked in finance. Everyone drinking expensive wine and talking about their careers and their investments and their 5-year plans. I felt like an alien in my own family's house. I was in the kitchen helping Mom with dessert when Madison found me. She'd been drinking, not drunk, but enough to loosen her tongue. "Emma," she said, leaning against the doorway with that smile she'd perfected in high school, the one that looked warm but felt cold. "We need to talk." Mom glanced between us nervously. "Girls, not tonight. This is supposed to be a celebration." "It's fine, Mom," she said, not taking her eyes off me. "Emma and I are just going to have a little sister chat upstairs." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. But I followed her up to the second floor, to the hallway outside our old bedrooms. The same hallway where we'd whispered secrets as kids, where we'd fought over bathroom time, where Madison had always reminded me that she was older, smarter, better. "Derek and I are getting engaged," she said without preamble. That's great, Madison. Congratulations. "We're looking at houses, big houses. The kind of houses where we can entertain properly, where Derek's partners will feel comfortable." She was pacing now, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "The kind of houses that cost real money." I waited, not sure where this was going, but knowing I wasn't going to like it. "Dad's been helping with the down payment, but it's not enough. We need more." Madison stopped pacing and looked me directly. "Mom and Dad are getting older. They're starting to think about their estate planning." My heart started beating faster. "Madison, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that they're being sentimental about dividing everything equally. I'm saying that equal isn't fair when one daughter is building a real life and the other is playing with puppies for minimum wage." The words hit me like a slap. Playing with puppies? Come on, Emma. You're 26 years old. You live in a studio apartment and drive a car that's older than some of our college interns. You have what, maybe $5,000 in savings? What are you going to do with an inheritance? Buy more rescued cats? I could feel the familiar shame creeping up my chest, the same feeling I'd carried my entire life around Madison. I'm going back to school. I'm working towards something. Working toward what? Becoming a vet at 30, 35? And then what? Opening some little clinic in the suburbs where you barely break even? Madison stepped closer, and I could smell the wine on her breath. Emma, be realistic. You're never going to be successful like me. You're never going to need the kind of money that I need. So what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to talk to mom and dad. I'm asking you to tell them that you want me to have a larger share of the inheritance, that you understand I can make better use of it. I stared at her. You want me to give up my inheritance so you can buy a bigger house? I want you to stop being selfish for once in your life. The accusing was so backwards, so twisted, that I actually laughed. I'm being selfish? Yes, you're being selfish by holding on to money you don't need and can't use responsibly. You're being selfish by making mom and dad feel guilty about the fact that their daughters aren't equally successful. You're being selfish by pretending that your little veterinary assistant job is just as important as my career. Each word was designed to cut, and they were working. Madison had always known exactly how to make me feel small. I'm not pretending anything, I said quietly. I'm just trying to live my life. Well, maybe it's time you started thinking about what's best for the family instead of just what's comfortable for you. What's best for the family? Or what's best for Madison? Her face changed. The fake sweetness disappeared, replaced with something cold and sharp. You know what your problem is, Emma? You've never had to compete for anything in your life. Everything has been handed to you because you're the baby, because mom and dad feel sorry for you. Well, I'm tired of pretending that we're equals when we're not. I'm tired of watching you coast through life while I work my ass off to succeed. I'm not coasting.
You are. You're coasting on the assumption that you deserve the same things I do, even though you haven't earned them. You're coasting on the assumption that mom and dad will always bail you out, always make sure you're taken care of, even though you've never taken care of yourself. I felt something snap inside me. 26 years of being the disappointment, of being compared to Madison, of being made to feel like my dreams were smaller and less important than hers. You know what, Madison? You're right. We're not equals. Because I would never ask my sister to give up her inheritance so I could buy a bigger house. I would never make my family choose between their children. And I would never, ever stand here and tell someone I'm supposed to love that their life doesn't matter. Madison's face twisted with anger. Your life doesn't matter, Emma. Not in the way that counts. You're 26 years old and you have nothing to show for it. No career, no money, no prospects. You're a charity case that mom and dad feel obligated to support. And I'm sick of subsidizing your mediocrity. Then don't, I said, turning to walk away. Don't subsidize anything. I'll make my own way, like I always have. Where are you going? Home? I'm done with this conversation and I'm done with this party. Emma, wait! But I was already walking toward the stairs, my whole body shaking with anger and hurt and something else I couldn't name. I just wanted to get out of that house, away from Madison's poison words, away from the family that had always made me feel like I wasn't enough. I was halfway down the stairs when I felt Madison's hand on my shoulder. We're not done talking, she said, her voice tight with anger. I tried to shrug her off. Yes, we are. Let me go, Madison. But she didn't let go. She grabbed my arm, trying to turn me around to face her. Don't walk away from me. Don't you dare walk away from me. I pulled harder, trying to break free from her grip. Let me go. And then everything happened so fast. Madison's hand slipped from my arm to the middle of my back. For just a second, I thought she was going to apologize, going to try to hug me or something. Instead, she pushed. Hard. I had no time to catch myself, no time to grab the railing, no time to do anything but fall. The stairs rushed up to meet me, each step hitting like a hammer. I remember the sound of my head hitting the hardwood at the bottom. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth. I remember Madison screaming. And then I remember nothing at all. I woke up in the hospital 4 months later. 4 months.
16 weeks, 123 days of nothing. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, lucky to have no permanent brain damage, lucky that the swelling in my brain had gone down on its own. Lucky. The first face I saw was my nurse, Karen, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands. She was the one who told me what had happened, where I was, how long I'd been unconscious. "Your family will be so relieved," she said, adjusting the machines that had been keeping me alive. "They've been so worried." But as the hours passed, no family members appeared. Karen kept glancing at the door, clearly expecting someone to show up. When no one did, she tried calling the contact numbers in my file. "The numbers seem to be disconnected," she told me apologetically, "but I'm sure they'll be here soon." They weren't. It took me 2 days to work up the courage to ask Karen to try calling again. This time, she reached someone, my father. I could only hear Karen's side of the conversation, but it was enough. "Mr. Carter? This is Karen Williams, calling from Portland General Hospital about your daughter, Emma? Yes, she's awake. Yes, she's going to be fine. When can you visit? I see. I understand. Yes, I'll let her know." When she hung up, Karen's face was carefully neutral, in the way that medical professionals learn to be when they're trying not to judge their patients' families. "Your father says they're very busy right now, but they'll try to visit soon. Too busy to visit their daughter, who just woken up from a 4-month coma." The message was clear. Over the next few days, pieces of the story came together through conversations with nurses, phone calls from insurance companies, and fragments of my own returning memory. The official story was that I'd fallen down the stairs at Madison's birthday party. An accident. Madison had found me unconscious and called 911 immediately. She'd ridden with me in the ambulance, had stayed at the hospital until I was stable. For the first few days, apparently my parents had visited regularly. They'd sat by my bedside, held my hand, talked to the doctors about my prognosis. Madison had come when she could, though her work schedule in Seattle made it difficult. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, the visits became less frequent. There were always reasons: work obligations, travel, other commitments. Madison was working on a big case. Dad had an important conference. Mom was dealing with a family friend's crisis. The nurses tried to be diplomatic about it, but I could read between the lines. My family had given up on me. They'd written me off, moved on with their lives, accepted that I wasn't coming back. And why wouldn't they? I was the disappointment daughter, the one who'd never amounted to anything. Why waste time sitting by the bedside of someone who might never wake up, especially when they had successful, important lives to live? The betrayal of it was almost worse than the physical pain of recovery. But there was something else, something that nagged at me as my memories slowly returned. The conversation with Madison before I fell. Her anger, her desperation, her hands on me. The way she'd grabbed my arm. The way she'd pushed. Had it really been an accident? I was in the hospital for 3 weeks after waking up. Physical therapy to regain my strength, cognitive tests to make sure my brain was working properly, a parade of doctors checking and rechecking that I was really, truly going to be okay. My insurance covered most of it, thankfully, but there were still bills. Lots of bills. The kind of bills that someone making veterinary assistant wages couldn't easily handle. I called my parents once during those 3 weeks. Mom answered. "Emma," she said, and her voice sounded genuinely relieved. "Oh my God, we heard you were awake. How are you feeling?" I'm okay. I'm getting better." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We've been so worried." "Worried enough to visit?" There was a pause. "Emma, honey, we wanted to be there, but the doctors said you weren't ready for visitors, and we didn't want to interfere with your recovery." "Mom, I've been awake for 2.5 weeks." Another pause. We thought you'd want space to focus on getting better." "I wanted my family. We're here now, sweetheart. We're here for you." "Are you?" "Because it doesn't feel like it." "Emma, don't be dramatic. You've been through a trauma, and sometimes that can make people feel..." "Don't. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Don't tell me how trauma makes people feel. Don't minimize this. I'm not minimizing anything. I'm just saying that we've all been dealing with this situation differently. What situation, Mom? Your daughter being in a coma? That situation? Emma, please. This isn't helping anyone. You're right. It's not helping, because nothing I say is going to change the fact that you abandoned me when I needed you most. We didn't abandon you. Yes, you did. You decided I wasn't worth waiting for. You decided your lives were more important than being here when I woke up. And you know what? Maybe you were right. Maybe I'm not worth it. Emma, don't say that. I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to any of them before the lawsuit. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, I went back to my apartment to find that my landlord had cleaned it out. I'd been gone for 4 months without paying rent, and he'd had every right to evict me. My belongings were in storage, and I owed 3 months of back rent plus fees. I had nowhere to go. I ended up staying at a women's shelter for 2 weeks while I figured out my next steps. The irony wasn't lost on me. I came from a wealthy family, but I was homeless because they decided I wasn't worth helping. It was at the shelter that I met Rebecca, a social worker who also happened to be a former lawyer. She listened to my story with the kind of focused attention I hadn't gotten from anyone in months. Emma, she said when I finished, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you really think your fall was an accident? I'd been asking myself the same question for weeks, but hearing it from someone else made it real. I don't know, I said honestly. I remember Madison being angry. I remember her grabbing me. I remember feeling her hand on my back. But I can't say for certain that she meant to push me down the stairs. But you can't say for certain that she didn't. No. And regardless of whether she pushed you intentionally, your family abandoned you during your recovery. They left you to face medical bills, homelessness, and trauma completely alone. Yes. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Emma, I think you need to talk to a lawyer, not just about the potential assault, but about your family's abandonment, about the financial consequences of their neglect, about the emotional distress they've caused. I can't afford a lawyer. There are lawyers who work on contingency. And honestly, with a case like this, I don't think you'd have trouble finding representation. You really think I have a case? I think your family failed in their most basic obligation to care for you when you were vulnerable. I think they caused you significant financial and emotional harm, and I think they need to be held accountable for that. That night, I lay awake in my narrow shelter bed and thought about everything that had brought me to this point. Madison's cruelty, her demand that I give up my inheritance, her hand on my back, my parents' visits tapering off, their excuses, their abandonment when I needed them most. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just hurt, but genuinely angry. These people had claimed to love me my entire life, but when it mattered most, they'd thrown me away like I was nothing. Maybe it was time they learned that I was something. Maybe it was time they learned that actions have consequences. Maybe it was time they faced the daughter they'd left for dead. Finding a lawyer was easier than I'd expected. Rebecca connected me with someone she knew, who connected me with someone else, who finally connected me with David Martinez, a personal injury attorney who specialized in family cases. David listened to my story with the same focused attention Rebecca had, taking detailed notes and asking questions that forced me to remember details I'd tried to forget. This is complicated, he said when I finished. Proving that Madison intentionally pushed you down the stairs is going to be difficult without witnesses or a confession. But the abandonment case is much stronger. What do you mean? I mean that your family had a legal and moral obligation to ensure you were cared for during your medical crisis. Instead, they actively chose to abandon you, leaving you to face homelessness and financial ruin. That's a form of intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially elder abuse statutes could apply, even though you're not elderly There are similar protections for vulnerable adults. So, I have a case? I think you have multiple cases. The question is what you want to achieve. I thought about it. I want them to face consequences. I want them to understand what they put me through. And honestly, I want them to pay for the financial damage they caused by abandoning me. What about criminal charges for the assault? I was quiet for a long time. I want to focus on the civil case first. If Madison did push me deliberately, I want her to have to admit it under oath. I want her to have to face what she did in front of a judge and jury. David nodded. Civil cases have a lower burden of proof than criminal cases. We might be able to establish that she was at least negligent, even if we can't prove intent. How long will this take? Probably a year, maybe more. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for your family to fight back, to try to discredit you, to make this as ugly as possible? I thought about the past 4 months. The coma, the abandoned recovery, the homelessness, the crushing weight of being discarded by the people who were supposed to love me most. They already made it ugly, I said. I'm just making it official. The first thing David did was send a letter to my family's attorney, informing them that I was alive, recovered, and pursuing legal action. Apparently, the shock of receiving that letter was considerable. My family had been telling people that I was still in a vegetative state, that my prognosis was uncertain. Learning that I was not only conscious, but actively pursuing legal remedies caught them completely off guard. Within a week, I received a flurry of calls and texts from my parents. I didn't answer any of them, but David advised me to keep records of everything they said. The voicemails started apologetic. Emma, sweetheart, we had no idea you were doing so well. We want to see you. We want to help. Please call us back. But as days passed without a response, the tone changed. Emma, this is ridiculous. We're your family. Whatever lawyer has been filling your head with ideas about suing us, you need to think about what you're doing to our family. And finally, angry. Emma, if you think you can extort money from us with some frivolous lawsuit, you're mistaken. We have excellent lawyers and we're not going to be intimidated by this nonsense. Madison left only one voicemail, and it was pure ice. Emma, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. What happened to you was an accident, and if you try to claim otherwise, I will destroy you in court. I have resources you can't imagine, and I will use every single one of them to protect myself and our family. Drop this before you get hurt. The threat was both stupid and revealing. Madison had just left a recorded message threatening me in retaliation for a lawsuit. David was delighted. Please tell me you're going to keep leaving messages like this, he said after listening to it. She's building our case better than we could. But Madison was smarter than that. The threatening voicemail was the last direct communication I received from any of them. After that, everything went through lawyers. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal. David subpoenaed hospital records, phone records, financial documents, anything that could establish the timeline of my family's abandonment. We interviewed nurses, doctors, hospital staff, anyone who had witnessed my family's gradual disappearance from my life. What we found was worse than I had expected. According to hospital records, my family had indeed visited regularly for the first 2 weeks, but then something changed. The visits became shorter, less frequent, more perfunctory. Staff notes indicated that my parents seemed increasingly detached and uncomfortable during visits. One nurse's note from week 6 was particularly damning. Patient's mother seemed impatient during visit, checking phone frequently. When asked about patient's favorite music for therapy sessions, mother responded that she didn't really know what Emma liked anymore and suggested staff just play whatever. Another note from week 10. Patient's father asked several times about prognosis and probability of recovery. When informed that patient was stable, but timeline for consciousness was uncertain, father became visibly frustrated and made comments about not being able to plan around this indefinitely. But the most devastating evidence came from the financial records. 3 months into my coma, my parents had changed their will. The new version left everything to Madison, with a small trust fund for me in the event of recovery. The trust was structured in a way that would have given Madison control over how the money was spent. They had literally written me out of their lives while I was unconscious. Meanwhile, Madison had indeed gotten engaged to Derek. They had bought their dream house in Seattle, a $2 million property in an exclusive neighborhood. The down payment had come partially from my parents, as she'd planned. The timeline was clear. My family had waited just long enough to see if I would recover quickly, and when it became apparent that my coma might be permanent, they had made their peace with my absence and moved forward with their lives, including redistributing my inheritance to fund Madison's lifestyle. The betrayal was even more calculated than I had realized. As the case progressed, I started rebuilding my own life. David had connected me with a victims assistance program that helped me find temporary housing and financial support while the lawsuit was pending. I couldn't go back to my old job. 4 months away was too long, and they'd had to replace me. But I found work at a different veterinary clinic.
The work was familiar and comforting. Animals didn't judge, didn't abandon, didn't calculate your worth based on your success or failure. They just needed care and attention, things I was happy to provide. My new colleagues didn't know about the lawsuit or my family situation. To them, I was just Emma, the new vet tech who was good with anxious animals and worked extra shifts without complaining. It felt good to have an identity that wasn't defined by trauma or legal proceedings. But I couldn't escape the case entirely. Depositions, document reviews, meetings with David, the slow, grinding machinery of the legal system. My family hired an expensive law firm from downtown Portland, the kind of firm that specializes in making problems go away for wealthy clients. Their strategy became clear quickly. Discredit me, minimize their abandonment, and paint the lawsuit as a money grab by a troubled young woman who was exaggerating her injuries and her family's supposed neglect. Madison's deposition was particularly ugly. She maintained that my fall had been a complete accident, that she'd never touched me beyond trying to have a normal conversation. According to her, I'd been drinking at the party, false, had been walking unsteadily, false, and had tripped on my own while storming away from a minor disagreement about my life choices. Emma has always been dramatic, she said under oath. Even as children, she would blow up minor conflicts into major catastrophes. She couldn't handle any criticism or feedback about her choices, and she'd storm off or lash out whenever anyone tried to help her see reality. When asked about the inheritance conversation, Madison claimed it had never happened. According to her, our conversation had been about her engagement announcement, and I'd become irrationally upset that she was happy and successful. I think Emma has always resented my success. She's never been able to accept that some people work harder and achieve more than others. Instead of being happy for me, she's always looked for ways to tear me down or make herself a victim. The lies were so smooth, so confident that I could see how a jury might believe them. Madison was an accomplished attorney, articulate and professional, while I was a veterinary assistant who'd been homeless and living in a shelter. On paper, she looked credible, and I looked desperate. My parents' depositions were more defensive than outright dishonest. They admitted to reducing their visits over time, but claimed it was because the doctors had told them there was nothing they could do to help my recovery. They admitted to changing their will, but said it was because they weren't sure I would ever be capable of managing an inheritance if I did recover with brain damage. We were trying to be responsible, my mother testified. We were trying to make sure Emma would be taken care of regardless of her condition. We never abandoned her. We were protecting her. The gaslighting was so complete, so systematic, that I started to doubt my own memories. Had I been drinking at the party? Had I been dramatic and unreasonable? Had I misunderstood their absence as abandonment when they'd really been trying to help me? It was David who kept me grounded. Emma, I've seen the hospital records. I've talked to the nurses. I've reviewed the financial documents. Your family's version of events doesn't match the evidence, and it doesn't match what neutral parties observed. Trust the facts, not their spin. But facts don't always win in court, especially when the other side has better lawyers and more money to spend on expert witnesses and character assassination. As we approached trial, David sat me down for a difficult conversation. Emma, I need to be honest with you about something. This case is going to be harder to win than I initially thought. My heart sank. What do you mean? I mean that your family has done a good job of creating reasonable doubt about their motivations.
They've painted themselves as concerned parents making difficult decisions during a medical crisis rather than as people who abandoned their daughter. The will change, the reduced visits, even the financial impact on you, they've managed to reframe it all as responsible planning rather than neglect. But the nurse's notes are helpful but not conclusive. Nurses noting that your parents seem detached or impatient isn't the same as proving abandonment or intentional infliction of emotional distress. So I'm going to lose? Not necessarily, but I want you to understand that this trial is going to be brutal. Your family's lawyers are going to attack your character, your memory, your motives. They're going to make you look like a greedy, unstable person who's trying to cash in on a tragic accident. And they're good at what they do. I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about everything I'd been through, everything I'd lost, everything I was still fighting to recover. David, I said, finally, if I lose this case, I lose everything, not just the money. I lose any chance of my family ever acknowledging what they did to me. I lose any chance of them facing consequences. I lose any chance of justice. I know. And if I don't fight, they get away with it. They get to go on with their lives believing they did nothing wrong, believing I'm just the dramatic daughter who couldn't handle reality. Yes, then we go to trial, whatever it costs. Whatever they throw at me, we go to trial. David nodded. Okay, but Emma, I need you to promise me something. When this gets ugly, and it will get very ugly, I need you to remember that what they're saying about you in court isn't who you are. It's just a strategy to avoid accountability. Don't let them convince you that you deserve what happened to you. I'll try. No, promise me, because the hardest part of this whole thing might not be losing. It might be winning and discovering that vindication doesn't heal everything they broke. I promised, not knowing how prophetic his words would turn out to be. The trial began on a Tuesday in October, almost exactly 1 year after my fall. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, more mundane. This wasn't the dramatic setting I had imagined for such a life-changing confrontation. My family sat on the other side of the room, with their lawyers, looking like the successful, respectable people they'd always been. Dad in his expensive suit, looking older than I remembered but still commanding. Mom in a conservative dress and pearls, the picture of concerned motherhood. Madison in professional attire, every inch the successful attorney. They looked like people who belonged in that courtroom as plaintiffs, not defendants. People who deserved sympathy and understanding, not legal consequences. I looked like exactly what I was, a working-class woman in a discount store suit, sitting alone, except for her lawyer, pursuing a case that sounded implausible even to me when I heard it summarized by the defense. The opening statements set the tone. David laid out our case methodically, the suspicious circumstances of my fall, the systematic abandonment during my recovery, the financial consequences of their neglect, the emotional trauma of being discarded by my own family when I was most vulnerable. My family's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Thompson who probably cost more per hour than I made in a week, painted a very different picture. According to him, I was a troubled young woman who had always struggled with jealousy toward her successful sister, who had become increasingly unstable and dramatic as I'd failed to launch in my adult life, and who was now trying to blame her family for her own poor choices. The fall, Thompson argued, was a tragic accident that occurred because I was upset and not watching where I was going. My family's reduced visits were the result of medical advice and practical considerations, not abandonment. The changes to their will were responsible estate planning in the face of uncertainty about my cognitive recovery. And my lawsuit? It was a desperate money grab by someone who had finally found a way to profit from my lifelong resentment of my family's success. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Thompson said in his closing opening statement, this case is not about justice. It's about jealousy. It's about a young woman who has spent her entire adult life falling behind while her family moved forward, and who now sees an opportunity to cash in on a tragic accident by blaming the very people who have supported her throughout her life. Sitting there listening to him, I felt the familiar shame creeping back in. The same shame Madison had weaponized that night. The same shame that had followed me through childhood, and the same shame that whispered, maybe they were right about me. But then I looked at David, who was taking notes and looking completely unbothered by Thompson's character assassination. And I remembered Rebecca at the shelter, telling me that I deserved to be treated with dignity. And I remembered the nurse who held my hand when I woke up alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't making this up. I wasn't the person they were describing. I was someone who had been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me most, and I was fighting back. The trial lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks of testimony, evidence, expert witnesses, and character assassination. David had prepared me for the attacks on my credibility, but experiencing them in real time was devastating. Madison's testimony was masterful. She cried at appropriate moments, spoke with conviction about her love for me, and painted a picture of a concerned sister who had tried for years to help me get my life together. According to her, the conversation before my fall had been her attempt to offer me career advice and financial assistance, not a demand that I give up my inheritance. I loved my sister. I still love her, but Emma has always had trouble accepting help or feedback. She's always preferred to see herself as a victim rather than taking responsibility for improving her situation. When asked about the moment I fell, Madison's voice broke slightly. I reached out to stop her from leaving because I wanted to apologize for upsetting her. I wanted to fix things between us. But she pulled away from me, and she was moving so fast, and the stairs... She trailed off, wiping her eyes. I've lived with the guilt of that moment every day since it happened. If I hadn't tried to stop her, if I'd just let her go, maybe none of this would have happened. But I was trying to save our relationship, and instead I watched my sister almost die. It was a compelling performance, and I could see some jury members nodding sympathetically. My parents' testimony followed similar lines. They spoke about their anguish during my coma, their difficult decisions about medical care and financial planning, their joy when I recovered. They painted themselves as loving parents faced with an impossible situation, doing their best to balance hope and reality.
We never stopped loving Emma, my mother testified. We never gave up on her. But we had to be realistic about the possibility that she might never recover, or that she might recover with significant disabilities. We were trying to plan for every scenario, trying to make sure she would be taken care of no matter what happened. When David cross-examined her, he pressed hard on the timeline of their visits and the decision to change their will. Mrs. Carter, you testified that you never gave up on Emma, but isn't it true that you reduced your visits from daily to weekly by the second month? The doctor said there was nothing we could do to help her recovery. That's not what I asked. Isn't it true that your visits became less frequent? Yes, but... And isn't it true that by the third month you are visiting less than once a week? My mother's composure cracked slightly. We had to maintain our own lives. We had work obligations, other responsibilities. Other responsibilities more important than your daughter in a coma? That's not fair. We were doing the best we could in an impossible situation. Mrs. Carter, when you changed your will in the third month of Emma's coma, did you discuss this decision with Emma's doctors? We talked to our attorney about estate planning. Did you discuss it with Emma's doctors? Did you ask them about her prognosis, about the likelihood of her recovery? We knew the prognosis was uncertain. Mrs. Carter, please answer the question. Did you consult with Emma's medical team before deciding to write her out of your will? We didn't write her out. We created a trust. A trust that gave Madison complete control over Emma's inheritance. Yes or no, Mrs. Carter? Did you consult with Emma's doctors before making this decision? No. So you made a permanent decision about your estate based on a temporary medical situation without consulting the medical professionals who were actually treating your daughter. My mother's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury could see the calculation behind my parents' decisions, the way they'd given up on me long before they had any medical reason to do so. But the defense had their own devastating moments. When I took the stand, Thompson went after me with surgical precision. Miss Carter, you testified that you were saving money to go back to school for veterinary medicine.
How much money had you saved for this purpose at the time of your accident? About $8,000. $8,000, and how long had you been saving toward this goal? A few years. A few years to save $8,000 for a degree that would cost how much? Around $60,000 for the program I was looking at. So at your rate of saving, it would take you, what, 15 years to save enough money for veterinary school? I felt my face burn. I was also planning to take out student loans. Yes, student loans. Miss Carter, do you currently have any student loan debt? Yes. How much? About $22,000. From your community college education? Yes. So you already owed $22,000 for a 2-year degree and you were planning to borrow an additional $60,000 for veterinary school? That would put your total educational debt at over $80,000. What kind of salary did you expect to earn as a veterinarian? David objected that this was irrelevant, but I could see what Thompson was doing. He was painting me as financially irresponsible, someone who made unrealistic plans and poor decisions. Miss Carter, let's talk about the night of your accident. You testified that Madison demanded you give up your inheritance. But isn't it true that she was offering to help you financially? No, she was asking me to give up my share so she could buy a bigger house. But she did offer to help you, didn't she? She offered to help you get back on your feet, maybe find you a better job through her professional contacts. That's not what happened. Miss Carter, isn't it true that you've always resented Madison's success? That you've always felt jealous of her achievements? No. Isn't it true that you've spent your adult life making choices that ensured you would remain financially dependent on your family because it was easier than taking responsibility for your own success? That's not true. Miss Carter, you're 26 years old. You live in a studio apartment, drive a 15-year-old car, and work in a job that barely pays above minimum wage. Are those the choices of someone who is taking responsibility for their own life? The questions kept coming, each one designed to make me look exactly like what Madison had called me: a failure, a disappointment, someone who deserved whatever happened to her. But the time Thompson finished with me, I felt like I'd been flayed alive. Every insecurity, every struggle, every moment of self-doubt had been dragged out and displayed for the jury to judge. But David had prepared me for this. During redirect, he helped me tell my side of the story.
Emma, Mr. Thompson asked you about your savings and your career plans. Can you tell the jury why those things are relevant to whether your family had the right to abandon you during your medical crisis? They're not relevant, I said, finding my voice again. I may not be as successful as Madison, but I'm still a person. I still deserved to have my family there when I was fighting for my life. And Emma, regardless of your financial situation, did you deserve to be pushed down a flight of stairs? Thompson objected, but I answered anyway. No, nobody deserves that. Emma, what has been the hardest part of this whole experience for you? I thought about it carefully. The hardest part has been realizing that the people I thought loved me unconditionally actually only loved me when it was convenient for them. That when loving me became difficult or inconvenient, they were willing to throw me away. The courtroom was completely silent. And Emma, what do you want from this lawsuit? I want acknowledgement. I want them to admit what they did to me. I want them to face consequences for their choices. And I want to make sure that no other family member ever has to go through what I went through. The closing arguments were everything I'd expected, and more. Thompson painted me as a greedy, jealous sister trying to profit from a tragic accident. David painted my family as cold, calculating people who had abandoned their own daughter when she became inconvenient. Both narratives had elements of truth, which made the jury's job nearly impossible. The deliberation lasted 2 days. 2 days of waiting, of second-guessing everything, of wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake in pursuing this case. When the jury returned, I could read nothing in their faces. The foreman stood up and began reading the verdict. In the matter of Carter v. Carter, on the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find for the plaintiff, Emma Carter, and award damages in the amount of $250,000. I felt David's hand squeeze my shoulder, but I couldn't process what I was hearing.
On the claim of negligent infliction of emotional distress, we find for the plaintiff and award additional damages of $100,000. On the claim of assault, we find for the plaintiff and award damages of $50,000. I was shaking now, unable to believe what I was hearing. On the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress against Madison Carter specifically, we find for the plaintiff and award punitive damages of $100,000. The total was $500,000. $500,000 that my family would have to pay me for what they'd done to me. But more important than the money was what the verdict meant. 12 strangers had listened to both sides of the story and decided that my family had wronged me, that what they'd done was inexcusable, that I deserved justice. I looked across the courtroom at my family. Mom was crying, her face buried in her hands. Dad was staring straight ahead, his face stone. And Madison was looking directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but something that might have been shock. She was seeing me for the first time as a real person, not just an obstacle to her happiness. Then, as the judge was finishing the formalities and the jury was being dismissed, something extraordinary happened. Dad stood up suddenly, swaying on his feet. Mom looked up at him in alarm. "Richard?" she said. And then he collapsed. Not dramatically, like in a movie, but like someone whose legs had simply given out. One moment he was standing, the next he was on the floor, his expensive suit crumpled, his face pale and shocked. Mom screamed and rushed to his side. Madison dropped her briefcase and ran around the table. Their lawyers were calling for paramedics. But I just sat there, watching my father lying on the courtroom floor, and I felt nothing. Or not nothing. I felt something, but it wasn't concern or fear or familial love. It was a strange kind of satisfaction. The universe had finally provided the dramatic ending this whole mess deserved. David leaned over to me. "Emma, are you okay?" "I think so," I said, surprising myself. "I think I'm finally okay."
Update, posted 3 months later. A lot of people have been asking for an update on how things resolved, so here it is. My father had what his doctors called a stress-induced cardiac event. Basically, the shock of the verdict and the financial implications caused him to have what was essentially a panic attack that mimicked a heart attack. He was fine physically, but the incident was a pretty clear indication of how much the whole situation had affected him. My parents paid the judgment within 6 weeks. I found out later that they had to take out a second mortgage on their house and liquidate most of their retirement savings to cover it. Madison had to pay her portion of the punitive damages out of her own savings, which apparently put a significant dent in her wedding plans. I'm not going to lie, there was some satisfaction in knowing that their choices had real financial consequences for them, the same way their abandonment had had real financial consequences for me. But the strangest thing about winning was how empty it felt afterward. Don't get me wrong, the money changed my life in practical ways. I was able to pay off my medical bills, my student loans, my back rent. I was able to put a down payment on a small house, start a real emergency fund, and even begin saving for veterinary school again. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security. But emotionally, the victory felt hollow. I'd spent almost 2 years focused on making my family face consequences for what they'd done to me. And when it finally happened, it didn't heal anything. It didn't give me back the family I'd lost, or the sense of belonging I'd never really had, or the innocence about people I loved. It just gave me money and the knowledge that I'd been right about what happened to me. I had one conversation with Madison after the trial. She called me about a month later, when the initial shock had worn off and the financial reality had set in. "Emma," she said, and her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller, less certain. "I need to tell you something. That night, before you fell, I was angry. I was so angry at you for not understanding what I was trying to do, for not seeing that I was trying to help the family, for being so stubborn about everything." I waited. "And when you started to walk away, when you wouldn't listen to me,
I did put my hands on you. I did try to stop you. And maybe I pushed harder than I meant to. It wasn't a confession exactly, but it was closer to the truth than she'd ever gotten before. Are you saying you pushed me down the stairs intentionally? I'm saying I was angry, and I wasn't thinking clearly, and I made a choice that I've regretted every day since it happened. Madison, you could have killed me. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know, and I hate myself for it. Do you? Do you really? Or do you just hate that there were consequences? I don't know, she said, and for the first time in our entire relationship, Madison sounded genuinely uncertain about something. I honestly don't know. That was the last time we spoke. My parents sent me a letter a month later. It was formal, typed, the kind of letter you'd send to settle a business dispute. They acknowledged they had made mistakes during a difficult time, and that they were sorry for any pain they had caused. They hoped that, in time, we could rebuild some kind of relationship. It read like something their lawyer had written, carefully worded to acknowledge minimal responsibility while leaving the door open for future contact. I didn't respond. The truth is, I don't think my family is made up of evil people. I think they're people who prioritize their own comfort and success over everything else, including their relationships with family members who don't contribute to that success and comfort. I think they're people who are capable of love, but only when it's easy and convenient. And I think that's probably true of a lot of families, which is the saddest part of all this. I'm in therapy now, which I should have started years ago. I'm working on understanding how I ended up in a family dynamic where my worth was determined by my achievements, and how I internalized that value system, even when it was destroying me. I'm also working on building relationships with people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. It turns out that's harder than it sounds when you've spent your entire life believing that love is conditional on performance. But I'm getting there. I still work at the veterinary clinic, and I'm still saving for school, but now it's realistic rather than a desperate fantasy. I volunteer at a crisis center for people who've been abandoned by their families. There are more of us than you'd think. And I've learned something important. Justice and healing are not the same thing. Getting justice felt good in the moment, but it didn't fix what was broken inside me. That's work I have to do myself, with the help of people who actually care about my well-being. Would I do it all again? Pursue the lawsuit, go through the trial, force my family to face consequences? Yes, absolutely yes. Not because it gave me a fairy tale ending where everyone learned their lesson and we all hugged and made up, but because it taught me that I'm worth fighting for, even when I have to do the fighting myself. It taught me that being abandoned by people who are supposed to love you isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their capacity for love. And it taught me that sometimes the family you're born into isn't your real family. Sometimes your real family is made up of people who choose to show up for you when you're vulnerable, who choose to care about you when caring is difficult, who choose to value you when you have nothing to offer them in return. I'm still building that family, but for the first time in my life, I believe I deserve to have it. TLDR, family abandoned me during a 4-month coma after my sister pushed me downstairs, sued them and won $500,000. Got justice and financial security, but learned that winning doesn't heal everything they broke. Now I'm working on building a real family with people who actually value me. Final update, posted 1 year later. I wasn't planning to post another update, but I got a message today that I think some of you need to hear. A woman reached out to me whose brother had financially abused their elderly parents and was trying to cut her out of the family business. She said my story gave her the courage to fight back legally, and she just won her case. She said something that stuck with me. I finally understood that being the difficult one who rocks the boat is sometimes the only way to stop the boat from sinking. That's when I realized why I keep getting messages from people thanking me for sharing my story, even though it's messy and painful and doesn't have a perfect ending. It's because so many of us grow up in families where we're taught that keeping the peace is more important than standing up for ourselves, where we're taught that family loyalty means accepting mistreatment without complaint, where we're taught that being difficult or dramatic is worse than being victimized. And sometimes someone needs to be willing to be the difficult one. Someone needs to be willing to make things uncomfortable, to force conversations that everyone wants to avoid, to insist that actions have consequences. Sometimes someone needs to be willing to blow up the family dynamic that protects the people who cause harm at the expense of the people who suffer it. I was the person in my family. Maybe it's you in yours. I'm not saying everyone should sue their relatives. I'm not saying that legal action is always the right response to family betrayal. What I am saying is that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect by the people who claim to love you. And if they're not willing to do that voluntarily, it's okay to find ways to require it. It's okay to be the difficult one. It's okay to rock the boat. It's okay to refuse to be convenient. Your peace of mind, your sense of self-worth, your fundamental human dignity, these things matter more than maintaining a comfortable fiction that everyone in your family is a good person who loves you unconditionally. Some people only learn to treat others with respect when there are consequences for not doing so. And if you're the person who has to enforce those consequences, that doesn't make you the villain of the story. It makes you the hero of your own life. One last thing. I got into veterinary school. I start classes in the fall. Turns out that having financial stability and a strong sense of self-worth makes everything else possible. Thanks for reading, thanks for the support, and thanks for showing me that I'm not alone in this. Take care of yourselves. You're worth fighting for, even when you have to do the fighting yourself. Especially then. Edit. Thank you for the gold and all the messages. For those asking about legal specifics, please consult with an attorney in your area. For those sharing similar stories, I see you and I'm rooting for you. For those suggesting I should forgive and move on, I've moved on, I'm thriving, and forgiveness is not a prerequisite for healing. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for toxic people is hold them accountable for their choices.